right. People are coming on right now. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to our third installment for our webinar. Welcome, everyone. People are popping up, Bob. I will give everyone a couple of minutes to log on, and we will start within a minute's time. So if you just wait for us patiently, we will start within a minute's time. It's a good group right now, Bob. There are a lot of good people popped up, but
good. Yeah.
We'll start in a couple of minutes. I'm just allowing some people to log on. So thank you so much for joining us for our third installment for our virtual conversation. We will start promptly at 7:02 to allow some participants to log on. Thank you. All right, we will start in 1 minute. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay. All right. All right, Bob, ready to go?
I'm ready.
Fantastic, fantastic. Wow, what a great group of people, Rob. We have a good group of people. First of all, welcome everyone. Welcome guests to our third installment of our virtual conversation series, sponsored in part by PNC Bank. My name is Joel Buno, and I am the executive director here at the Asia Institute Crane House, located in beautiful Old Louisville. With the increased rate of vaccinations, we hope to gather together again. We are fortunate. We are fortunate, though, that technology has progressed and has allowed us to continue gathering virtually to share great art, culture, and experiences from Asia and the Pacific Islands. Asia Institute Crane House is a 501c3 nonprofit and depends on the generosity of supporters like you to help us continue to offer great programming. Please consider a tax-deductible gift to Asia Institute Crane House to support our work. I will post a direct link for contributions in the chat box shortly. We are so excited to have rescheduled our discussion, The Silk Road and the Mysterious Mummies of the Tarim Basin, which was originally scheduled before the pandemic, but we're so glad to reschedule it now. There's probably no other highway in human history spanning a long time and as far a distance as what we call today the Silk Road. For almost 1,500 years, it profoundly affected peoples and societies in a myriad of ways, economically, politically, technologically, and spiritually. Because the saga of the Silk Road offers so much, it becomes a quintessential human story. Our veteran Silk Road traveler, Bob Jones, relates some of that fascinating history in his presentation. His illustrated talk introduces some of the many sites, cultures, and peoples found along the route, going all the way back to 3,000 years of Xinjiang mummies, whose ancient remains continue to intrigue us today. So let me just give you a brief intro on my friend Bob Jones. Robert, aka Bob Jones, Bob A. Jones, has a long involvement with Asia. He has a BA in Chinese Studies from San Francisco State and an MA in Chinese Archaeology from National Taiwan University. He lived in Taiwan for nearly 10 years and in 1986 began a 20-year career in Chinese travel business, designing the leading trips for such institutions as City College of San Francisco, the University of Louisville, IUS, and the Nature Conservancy, and the Smithsonian Institute. And for 2 summers, he was Master Chinese teacher for the Raisha language program in China. He moved to Louisville in 2002 as he taught Chinese at St. Francis School for 12 years before retiring in 2017. Bob has been involved with AICH, Asia Institute Crane House, for nearly 15 years and has been a board member for much of that time. Bob is now pursuing a doctorate in humanities from the University of Louisville and continues to be involved with Asia Institute Crane House. So without further delay, I present to you Bob Jones. But before I hand it over to you, Bob, just a quick question from me. Why the interest in the Silk Roads before you start your presentation, sir?
Why am I interested? Well, when I got into the China travel business in 1986, I didn't have a choice of where I could lead a trip. I was just assigned a trip, and it happened to be a 28-day trip along the Silk Road. And I immediately fell in love with the area of Central and Western China, especially. So it's always been my favorite area, Western China and then Central Asia and on. So yes, it's.
So we are very fortunate and blessed to listen to your interest. So Bob, if we can, before I leave you, let me just make sure, pull up your PowerPoint to make sure that we can share it.
Okay.
And then once I know that everything's going well, I will leave you to it.
Okay, now let's see. Do I?
There you go. Now just go to that icon on top. There you go. Start the slideshow.
And then
click on that. Start from the beginning.
Yeah.
There you go. So Bob, it's all you. I'll leave it to you. And thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Joel. I really appreciate you and AICH, Asia Institute at Crane House, for everything that you've done and to arranging this talk tonight, and arranging the technical details of tonight's program, which I'm not that familiar with. Okay. Thank you, Joel. Tonight I'm going to talk about the Silk Road in general, but then I'm going to delve into a more detailed but short look into some of the Silk Road people whose ancient mummified remains have survived to this day. And then I'll try to answer whatever questions you may have after the talk, and Joel will help me with that. Now, the Silk Road. Well, silk certainly implies something that is comfortably luxurious, but the road that took silk as its appellation was neither, and not even close. I want to start tonight with a few images of different routes that will give you an idea of the variety and starkness of the landscapes that changed the ancient travelers then and even travelers today. This being the Gobi Desert at Jiayuguan, which is toward near the end of the Ming Dynasty Great Wall in Western China. This was the caravan route through northern Pakistan, or you might say in ancient times, northern India, from China into India. This is prior to the building of the Karakoram Highway in the 1990s and 1980s and 1990s. So you can see what a challenge it could be. Tashrabad was a caravanserai just over the border in Kyrgyzstan from China. And this is where caravans would spend the night on their way into Central Asia from China, or going into Western China from Central Asia. A number of amazingly high and challenging mountain ranges are basically in the way of the route. And this is the Pamir Mountains near Khunjerab Pass, not far from Khunjerab Pass, which is the pass between present China and Pakistan. the old Silk Road into Buddhist India at the time. Dust storms are an ever-present challenge in Western China, the Karaboran, or Great Sand Storm in the Middle Route. And we ran into these periodically, and it would shut down basically all travel, whether it's today or whether it was 1,000 years ago. Sand dunes, both in the Gobi Desert as well as in the Taklamakan Desert in the middle of the Tarim Basin, were certainly challenges to travelers in the past, and certainly they are still today. The Tarim Basin being one of the hottest places, the driest places on Earth. And going over basically the Qinghai Plateau, part of the Tibetan Plateau, you might say it was a shortcut, one of the minor routes of the Silk Road, but it's also extremely stark and desert. The Tian Shan Mountains, or Heavenly Mountains, in northern Xinjiang province in Western China, were an area that many of the nomads lived in the early days of the Silk Road. And the Kunlun Mountains, which is another mountain range in Western China and between northern Pakistan and India and Western China. So you can see how challenging that could be. Now, this is the Indus River Valley in northern Pakistan. So this is where the route from China, from Western China into ancient India would pass through. And this is the route that Buddhism made its way over the Pamirs and into China in the 1st century AD. One of the magnificent Pamir mountains in Western China near Pakistan, Mustagata. And in northern Pakistan today, or it would have been northern India in ancient times, the Hunza Valley with Altar Peak. Last time I was there, Altar Peak had not yet been climbed. All right, so here's a map. Now, I just want to point out that the routes that are shown on this map are only the major routes. There are myriad, dozens of smaller routes that connected to these major routes. But you can see it goes all the way from Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty, to Antioch on the Mediterranean. But I really wanted to start with a couple of anecdotes about how the past is viewed today and my own take on it. Now, I had a student a few years ago who wasn't doing so well in his history class. And when I asked him why, he said, and I'll never really forget it, I haven't forgotten it, and I quote, "History is so not now," end quote. Well, that is true, that as much as now is now, but a minute later, it's history. In contrast, however, there was a recent article in the local paper about a high school student who was able to get Nugent House, an early center for Black women's education in Louisville, placed on the National Register of Historic Places. She said, and I quote, "I really like learning about history. I often find that it is never not relevant. There's always something that can be applied to today that can inspire us and teach us," end quote. Now, my own fascination with history, American history, when I was young, when I was a teenager, I was fascinated, especially the Civil War. It was a really fascinating topic. But I didn't really anticipate that I would eventually study history and become an archaeologist. Now, we don't have history cells in our brains that connect us to the world of 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. The study of history is a way to connect the past with the now. And archaeology is a way of discovering those connections. Now, the Silk Road is one of those ancient connecting paths, so literally and figuratively. It's complex because it traverses so much of the Eurasian continent and covers so much chronology. And for me, the more ancient, the more fascinating. The peoples of the Silk Road of 3 millennia ago are more interesting to me than those of a mere 500 years ago, even though we know much less about them. Perhaps that's why I find it interesting. The older, the better, as archaeologists are fond of saying. And it's funny, the British mystery writer Agatha Christie married archaeologist Max Mallowan, and she had some advice for the public. She said, quote, "An archaeologist is the best husband a woman can have. The older she gets, the more interested he is in her." End quote. Okay. Now let me get a little bit more serious. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what is in the introduction, but I'm pretty certain that there is no other highway in human history which has spanned as long a time and as far a distance as what we today call the Silk Road, nor which for almost 1,500 years affected so many people and societies in such profound ways, economically, politically, militarily, and spiritually, for as long a duration. Now, I want to begin, I'm going to start here with some dramatic scenarios. Now, each act contributing to, in its own way, to the establishment of this famous network of trade routes. Act 1, it's 2000 BC. It's 4,000 years ago. Southward, across the windswept sea of grass from Russia, drift small populations of peaceful herders, tall, light-haired people who settle in lush oases around the vast Tarim Basin. Now, with them, they bring a belief in the afterlife, and they tenderly bury their dead in the desert. They bring their music, their peculiar weaving skills, their horses, their goats, and quite likely they bring a new contraption to East Asia, the wheeled cart. But these people gradually die out, and only their mummified remains tell the story. And I'll talk about them a little bit more later at the end of this talk. Now, by the end of the 2nd millennium BC, the Shang people, far to the east on the north central plain of China, they have transformed the cart into a weapon of war, and royal kings and queens and princes ride into battle in two-wheel style. Okay, Act 2. It's 500 BC. Nomads of the northern steppe have mastered the horse, learning to ride it almost as if it was an extension of their bodies, leaving their hands free for remarkable shooting with bow and arrow. The Scythians have, by this mastery, become the scourge of the northern frontiers of the civilized worlds of Greece and Persia. A bit later, the Hu, H-U, the northern barbarians, that's what the Chinese called them, northern barbarians from Mongolia, they wreak havoc on North China, raiding and plundering with astonishing speed, and then vanishing back into the vast windswept grasslands from whence they came. Okay, Act 3. It's 307 BC, 307 BC. Wu Ling, the king of the northern Chinese border kingdom of Zhao, during these incessant wars against the mounted warriors of the Hu, decrees that henceforth his subjects must dress in the manner of the Hu, a costume better suited for horse riding than the flowing robes of the Chinese. That's his rationale. This change is made to facilitate the organization of squadrons of mounted archers from among the kingdom's general populace. Wu Ling is the first Chinese ruler to abandon the unwieldy chariot for the highly maneuverable cavalry of mounted archers. And his innovation is followed very quickly by the other contending states. Horse riding also becomes very popular in China. Okay, Act 4. In 138 BC, there was an intrepid Chinese envoy of the Han Emperor Wudi, and it was in search of a military alliance against the nomadic and the warlike Xiongnu. You can also call them the Huns. And he sets out for the kingdom of Yuezhi in Central Asia. So he, in the map from the far right, from Chang'an, he sets out west, and his first journey is the solid line, so you can follow that. He and his, he's heading to Yuezhi, which is in the far left, near where it says Indo-Scyth and Samarkand, in that area in there. That's where he's heading. But he and his companions are captured and held by the Xiongnu for 10 years. Okay. But he finally escapes. And rather than going back to China, he continues his mission, and he has a wife and he has a son, and he has only one of his original 100 companions that went with him. And he is able to make it to Fergana and Bactria and Sogdiana in Central Asia. The local rulers welcome him warmly, but an alliance escapes him. They don't want to fight the Xiongnu. So nonetheless, he makes some astonishing discoveries. He finds in the local market Chinese bamboo and silk brocade from Sichuan, and he knows it's Sichuanese brocade because Zhang Chen himself is from Sichuan, so he knows the local products. And he correctly surmises the existence of a land which we call India, and it was unknown to China until that time. And also he surmises that there is a trade route running through Southwest China and into India and into Central Asia. In Fergana, he also discovers a wondrous horse, which he calls heavenly horses. And they're much more beautiful, larger, and more powerful than the horses that the Chinese used. After an absence of 14 years, he is able to make it back to Chang'an, and his report to the emperor is the equivalent of making headlines. And just a few decades after he began his journey, at about 100 BCE, the first caravans set out from China to the west. Okay, well, Act 5. It's 53 BC. Julius Caesar has conquered Gaul. Pompey is the Roman ruler of Asia, which is at the time is Anatolia or present-day Turkey. Crassus is the third of the Roman triumvirates. He is granted Syria to rule. And pursuing his own glorious destiny, Crassus breaks a treaty with Parthia, present-day Iran, and invades its territory. The Roman legions cross the Euphrates to extend the empire, but they unexpectedly meet their match at the Battle of Carrhae against Parthian heavy and light cavalry, armed with powerful bows. And from that battle, we've added the phrase to English. Of course, at first it was probably in Latin, but we added the phrase, the Parthian shot, to our vocabulary. And a Parthian shot this is an example of it. And it is found in art, whether it's in China or in Iran or Persia or wherever. This is an example of a Parthian shot, a bowman shooting backwards from the saddle. This one, however, this picture here is a Roman Emperor Valerian submitting to Shapur the First, the king of the Sasanians, also a Persian kingdom, but that happened in the 5th century. So anyway, so you do have a very powerful Persia standing right in between China and Rome and the Roman Empire. But during the battle, what completely nonpluses the already dispirited Roman troops are the banners of iridescent silk, which the Parthians have unfurled during the banner. And it's the first silk that the Romans had ever seen. The defeat at Carrhae was devastating. More than 20,000 Roman soldiers are killed and 10,000 taken prisoner. Now, there's been a story, a historian has written a story that some of these Roman soldiers were actually ended up in Western China and had established their own community, which I think the Chinese in Gansu province has recognized. But anyway, so 10,000 were taken prisoner. Crassus's head was presented to the Parthian king. But more importantly, the Parthian trade monopoly across Eurasia was secured. China and Rome are kept apart by the Parthians. But silk conquers Rome as Roman silver flows east. So silk into Rome and silver into China, with Parthia right in the middle. Now, these 5 acts are but preludes to an astonishing era of communication and miscommunication between East and West, an era that saw the greatest flow of ideas and goods the world had ever seen before modern times. It is, after momentous centuries of sandy ebb and flow, again sharing with the world its secrets through archaeology on one hand and modern travel on the other. Now, China was never directly known to the West until the Middle Ages, when Europeans, there's upper right, that should be a picture of Marco Polo, if you can see it. In the Middle Ages, Europeans realized that the land at the end of the overland route across Asia was in fact the same one at the end of the sea route. Even in ancient times, from the names we gave to China, we see that it was only known but indirectly. Herodotus, the Greek writer, historian, called the people, that we would consider Chinese, he called the people the Hyperboreans, or the people beyond the north wind. While the Romans and Greeks knew them as the Ceres, Sine, or Sera, and that could be translated as the silk people. Indeed, the English word silk derives from the ancient Chinese word for that fabulous weave, pronounced in ancient times, sek. And today, silk is pronounced s, but in ancient times it is sek. So silk comes from sek. Now, much later, the name Cathay would give rise to visions of a marvelous, even fantastic kingdom at the ends of the earth. A vision encouraged by the legend of Prester John and by the publication and remarkable success of Marco Polo's travels. But the word Cathay, in fact, derives from the name of a tribe which ruled China, northern China, before the Mongol conquest. And this tribe was called the Kitai. So Cathay comes from Kitai. The name of the Mongol summer capital was called Shangdu, and that gave rise to our word for a wonderful metropolis, Xanadu. So Xanadu comes from Shangdu. Now, what the West knew of China was copious compared with Chinese knowledge of regions west. Prior to the first historical contacts in the 2nd century BC, the Western lands were known only through obscure legends, the Queen Mother of the West and the legendary travels of King Mu. It was a region fit only for fierce monsters and bloodthirsty barbarians. There's no historical evidence that it's been uncovered to indicate any knowledge of Rome or even of Persia. That is, not until the opening of the Silk Road. Now, in ancient times, even after gaining a mutual knowledge of each other's existence, no Chinese envoy ever penetrated into Roman territory. And with one improbable exception, no Roman ambassador ever stood before a Chinese emperor. That's not all surprising, for even during the heyday of the early Silk Road contacts, despite futile attempts at contact, the militarily strong Parthian and later Sasanian kingdoms in Persia stood squarely in between, as I mentioned earlier, conscientiously and with purpose, keeping them apart, controlling for their own profit the trade in silk, horses, and other goods between the two great empires at opposite ends of the continent. Now, going back to my 5 introductory acts, you may have picked up something that appears in each of those 5 acts, some common item, some common thread. But if you didn't, I will go ahead and tell you it's the horse. And as unlikely as it seems, it is not for silk that the longest, oldest, and most enduring of the old world's trade routes, only given the name Silk Road or Seidenstrasse in German in 1877, is inaugurated. It's for horses. And it was not named for horses, and if it was in German, it would be Pferdestrasse or horse road. And I have to say, even though I've traveled sections of the Silk Road dozens of times, and I've have with great interest witnessed silk being woven in textile centers of Eastern, Central, and Western Asia, I came across with just as much fascination with the role of the horse in Asian history as with silk. Now, the handicraft of silk weaving existed in China since at least 2500 BC, during the Stone Age era, during the Neolithic. And its manufacture became a closely guarded secret, punishable by death if you disclosed it. And silk did become a very desirable staple of cross-Eurasian trade. But it was not until the 1st century BC, and more than a century after the travels of the Han emissary Zhang Qian, which I talked about earlier. Now, what else moved along the trade routes? There were many things. There was glass, Persian glass, Roman glass. There was jade, and here's a jade from Western China. This moved along from Western China into China. Porcelain, plants, including roses, wheat, peaches, grapes, camellias, and cotton. Horses, as I mentioned, and slaves were some of the material commodities, among many other things. But also from very early on, the spread of religions played a part in keeping the route alive. Buddhism from India was the first, reaching China in the 1st century AD. Zoroastrianism from Persia in the following centuries. Nestorian Christianity reached China in the 7th century, and Islam the following century, in the 8th century. Now, technology, handicrafts, and aesthetics also followed the routes. Gunpowder and rockets came from China. The chariot, a wheeled cart from Central Asia. Cave art came from India. And paper and printing, again, from China to the West. The Silk Road trade really reached its height during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th and 8th centuries, when the capital of China, called Chang'an at the time, or its present day Xi'an, said to be the most cosmopolitan city in the world at the time, was the eastern terminus of the Silk Road. Tang culture was heavily influenced by trade with countries to the west of China, in fashion, in commodities, in music, and in art. Many of the traditional Chinese, what we think of traditional Chinese musical instruments, actually came either from Xinjiang province or from Central Asia. After the Tang, with North China in the hands of non-Chinese rulers, trade and contacts with Eurasia decreased. But then came the Mongols, who in their heyday in the 13th and 14th centuries ruled over the largest empire ever established in world history, stretching from China to Hungary. This control led to the rebirth of Eurasian trade and diplomacy. Among the travelers of this time was, of course, Marco Polo and papal envoys to the courts of Kublai Khan. Now, the end of the Silk Road came in the middle of the Ming Dynasty, when conservative officials and the emperor established an isolationist policy which cut China off from the rest of the world, be it overland, excuse me, or by sea routes, by forbidding overseas commerce and rebuilding the Great Wall. This is the wall at Mutianyu has been reconstructed. It's outside of Beijing. And this is Jiayuguan Fort at the end of the Ming Wall in Gansu province, far to the west. Now, the Great Wall, that's another famous institution associated with China and international relations, and it's also associated with the Silk Road. Most of us who have been to China have walked upon it, one place or another, and it's the most visited historical site in the country. Of course, it's not just one site, it's a very, very long site. It's 1,500 miles long. The wall was deployed off and on throughout Chinese history with varied success. With the earliest walls, they go as far back as the 7th or 8th century BC in North China. But during the Chinese Western expansion in the Western Han about 2,100 years ago, following Zhang Chen's explorations, the emperor ordered the construction of the wall far into the western regions. And not so much to keep invaders out, but protect its political expansion and the trade routes, which it controlled. Within the wall was the Chinese phrase for civilization. Beyond the wall, or outside the wall, was the unknown world populated with people the Chinese considered barbarian. Beyond the wall was the terrifying Lop Nor Desert, the Lop Nor Salt Desert. And this is peering at it from the end of the one end of the Han Dynasty wall. So the Lop Nor Desert, it was a desert that even Silk Road travelers in ancient times wrote was littered with bones and of merchants and their mounts. While not such an effective barrier during the height of the Silk Road in the Tang Dynasty, Jade Gate Pass, and this is driving into the desert to get to the end of the Han Dynasty wall, to Jade Gate Pass, at the far western end of the Long Wall. The Long Wall is what the Chinese call the Great Wall. And the wall became the liminal and often heartrending symbol of leaving home, leaving country, and leaving everything one knows behind, and often of leave taking. This is Yangguan. This is one of the ends of the Great Wall, one of the passes into the Lop Nor Desert, the end of the Great Wall. The Tang poet Wang Wei, one of my favorite poets, wrote the following lines. He had the misfortune of being stationed out here during the Tang Dynasty. And his poem goes something like this in English. Morning rain in Weicheng dampens the dusty ground. Willows give the inn's courtyard a fresh green. Why not drink one more bowl of wine? Beyond Jade Gate Pass, there are no old friends. Separation and homesickness were common themes of the Silk Road. Now, the history of the Silk Road was a hodgepodge of chronicles written in the West, in Central Asia, and in China. It was not really until the 19th century that general histories of the route began to be written, which covered its entire historical spectrum, scientific and academic research of the Silk Road, while having its beginnings in the explorations of the 19th and early 20th century, began in earnest after 1950, when China was reunited and political strife in China began to settle down, and more research and archaeology was done by Chinese scholars. And more so after 1989, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the de facto liberation of Mongolia. It's then that the sharing of research on the Silk Road enables scholars to write integrated histories, some of which are on the wall behind me, which that cover the entire geographical and chronological scale of the Silk Road. I'll finish this with another picture of Musagata Peak on the way into Pakistan. So I'm going to take a 1-minute break, and then we're going to talk about the mummies.
Great. And also, Bob, thank you so much. After that 1-minute break, we will begin with Bob's presentation. But if you have any questions, please don't forget to put them in the Q&A below, because after the end of our presentation on the mysterious mummies of the Tarim Basin, we will have a Q&A. Also, one quick reminder also is everyone who's registered for this event will get a copy or a link of this presentation, because this presentation is being recorded. So with that being said, we will take a 1-minute break for Bob to rest his voice, and then we will begin. So thank you so much.
I'm not used to teaching.
You're funny, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, but please go ahead if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. This part will be a little shorter. Well, let's go ahead and let me talk about the mysterious mummies of the Tarim Basin. Now, I wanted to spend a little time talking about this topic, and because it's one of the most ancient peoples who lived along the central route of the Silk Road and who trod the path before its historical opening, and a people with whom I have become well acquainted with. Now, these people are represented by the preserved bodies of those who are called the Xinjiang mummies. At the beginning of the 20th century, one British explorer in Western China came across mummified remains of people who did not resemble in physical features or clothing East Asians. This gentleman here, one reminded him of a Bohemian burgher, whom he thought may have gotten lost and died on the trade route. But for the last 40 or 50 years, more and more such remains have been discovered in China's western provinces, Xinjiang, hence their general name, Xinjiang mummies. The blue circles that you may see in the map represent those sites where the mummies have been found. You can see around the Tarim Basin, where the word Xinjiang is, around the Tarim Basin, and up on the toward the upper middle right, you can see the blue circles. These are sites where mummies have been found, and these are all very, very dry and arid places. Okay, so now from many different disciplines, whether it's archaeology, scientific dating methods, DNA tests, physical anthropology, and even historical records, scientists have concluded that these mummies are the remains of the easternmost population in Eurasia of a Caucasoid people, and possibly speakers of the Indo-European family of languages. DNA and dating shows that they came into Xinjiang in two waves, one about 2000 BC and the other about 1,000 years later, about 1000 BC. Now, the first at 2000 BC, they came from the Iranian plateau, which would be right to the where it says Kyrgyzstan and to the left of that. And the second came from the Central Asian steppe region, which would be in the upper left where it says Kazakhstan, that area. Some of the human remains are at least 4,000 years old. Now, most of the mummies were uncovered in family or clan tombs on the periphery of the Taklamakan Desert in the Tarim Basin, which is this bottom circular or oval area. That's the Tarim Basin. The most well-known of them were excavated from a cemetery called Zagunluk in Chechen near Chimwa on the southern route, and which I had the fortune to visit in 2001. The site, as you can see, is now open desert, but human remains and artifacts are readily found on the surface. The degree of preservation of the physical remains and grave goods inside the tombs is remarkable, as I will show you, and directly attributable to the environment where the tombs were located. These individuals did not go through an established mummification process like that in Egypt. What preserved them was the natural conditions, the extreme aridity and high temperatures of the Taklamakan, which is one of the driest places on earth, and also the saltiness of the desert soil. A body exposed to these arid and salty conditions can dry completely within a day or two. You could say that jokingly that the bodies were dried and salted within a day or so, sort of like human beef jerky. They're very, very quickly dried and intact. There have been well over 100 bodies discovered over the last few decades in various states of preservation. Now, I wanted to introduce several of them to you, one of whom is perhaps now better traveled than some of us, and who has a distinguished history of being published in National Geographic. So see if you can get that on your resume some 2,500 years from now. In one tomb complex discovered in Chechen that I just showed you pictures of, in 1985 was found the perfectly preserved body of an infant no more than 3 months old at death, the so-called Chechen baby. In a white felt-lined pit, it was wrapped in brown wool cloth held together with woolen yarn, and its eyes were covered with small flat stones. Next to his head was a drinking cup made from a cow's horn and an ancient baby bottle made from a sheep's teat that had been cut and sewn so it would hold milk. The Chechen baby, along with 2 other mummified corpses, might be considered to be the most well-traveled mummies ever. For in 2010 and 2011, they traveled to Santa Ana, California, Houston, and Philadelphia as distinguished members of an incredible exhibit on discoveries from Western China. Other corpses from the same tomb complex, were of an unusually tall man and woman associated with Chechen baby. The woman had yellowish brown hair dressed in braids, and both were decorated with facial designs. The man, who was about 55 years old, had a red woolen bracelet circling his right wrist, and hands were bound, probably just to keep them folded in death, keep them together in death. Another rather amazing discovery was that of a woman from the same cemetery in Chechen, who is wonderfully preserved, woolen clothing, face painting, tattoos, and all. And let me give you a close look at how well she's preserved. I wish I was that well preserved when I was 3,000 years old. But you can see the tattoo on her hands and face painting as well. Okay, there are two other mummies, maybe we can call them guardians, that accompanied the Church-on baby to the United States in 2010. One, that of a young woman, and she is called the Beauty of Xiaohe, the Xiaohe beauty after the site where she was found. She's about 3,500 to 3,800 years old, give or take her age of 20. And I guess it would be great to be able to look like that, after a few millennia. Now the other, let's see, and here's another close-up of her. And this site, the Xiaohe site, was actually far out in the desert itself. It was not near the periphery of the Tarim Basin, but farther out in the desert as a clan or a tribe cemetery. Another one, that of a well-to-do young man, only 16 to 1,700 years old, was buried in elaborate garments, some of which show unmistakable Hellenistic or Greco-Roman origins, and a very intriguing mask. And there's been no other burial like this found in Western China. One of the oldest of the mummies that has been found is the 3,800-year-old mummy of a woman known locally by the Uyghurs as the Lowland Beauty, after the site that she was found. The local people, the Uyghurs, they took her into their hearts and claimed her as the mother of our nation. In a song, she's called Kiruran Guzali, or the Beauty of Kiruran, the Uyghur name for lowland, where she was found. Now the descendants, let's see here. This is her in her splendor here. The descendants of these mummies eventually established many small kingdoms in the Tarim Basin. Ruins of many towns and cities dot the desert landscape throughout the region. Written records show that they spoke and wrote an Indo-European language called Tocharian, which eventually disappeared. Now today, most of the inhabitants of the Tarim Basin are Turkic-speaking Uyghurs, who now number about 8 million. The arrival of the Uyghurs from Mongolia in the mid-9th century was a prologue to the disappearance, at least linguistically, of the Tocharian peoples. So when they came in the 9th century, they basically merged with the local people. But the language, the Turkic language that the Uyghurs speak, replaced the Tocharian. All in all, the Silk Road has revealed more and more of its secrets in the last half century, from ancient sites and forts, remains of the Great Wall, mummies, and innumerable artifacts from Western China into Central Asia, Iran, and on to Turkey. It has been the environment that has been kind to the material remains scattered about along what was once the greatest trade route in history, giving us a glimpse into an ancient and up to now hidden world. These mummies may be dead, but they have made history come alive, and I hope it has for you. So I wanted to thank you all for joining in with us tonight, and I'll open it up for questions that you may have, and we'll go through Joel for those questions. Be happy to answer whatever I can.
Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you so much for the presentation. It's so great to see you in your jacket giving that presentation. I am very honored to be on the receiving end, and also have some questions here for you, or some comments. Also, guys, I have to admit, it's also nice sharing some time looking at some familiar names in the chat, and I just really do look forward to the time when we could all gather together and share in this together. Our first comment question is from our beautiful board member and also belated birthday to Ringside. Happy birthday, Ringside, to you. But her comment to you is there any way that you could comment on the tea trade via the Silk Road? And was any part of your tour conducted on camel rides? And she said,
Well,
by the way, your lecture was very, very enlightening.
the
Thank
second
you.
one first is whenever you go on the Silk Road as a tourist group, you will always have camel rides. And they are always on Bactrian camels, the two-hump variety, which are the Central Asian camel, and the ones that were really the animal that really kept these trade routes going, because they could live without water for weeks, if not months. So always getting a ride on the back of a Bactrian camel in places like Dunhuang or elsewhere. There are other places where you can do it now, in Turfan, where this was taken, is a possibility. As for the tea trade, well, there's a Silk Road, and there is a tea route. But while we still do find tea as a tradable commodity along the Silk Road, the tea route actually went through Southwest China, starting in South China in Sichuan, and going into the Tibetan Plateau and into India from there. So the tea route was very much, you might say, a commodity that was sought after, but it was more well known along the routes into South Asia rather than into Central Asia. But still, tea was part of that. Even along the Silk Road, tea was a commodity that was traded. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Okay, we have a couple more questions here. One is from our treasurer and one of my favorite board members. Well, all my board members are my favorites, but from Paula Doyle. If you could recommend just one city or area on the Silk Road to visit, which city or area would it be and why?
Oh boy. I have a number of favorite cities. Kashgar, number one. Kashgar is the westernmost city in Xinjiang, and so it's the westernmost city in China. And if I don't know if I can go back to map. Let me go back to a map.
Yeah.
Oh, let me, yeah. You could, if you take a look at the map, Kashgar is at the lower left. And why it's fascinating is because it was the intersection of 6 or 7 different caravan routes. You have the southern route, the southern Silk Route, south of the Tarim Basin. You have the middle route coming in on the north side of the basin. You have several routes coming in from India, one from Tajikistan, one from Pakistan, from Kyrgyzstan, you name it, you have trading routes coming in. And so Kashgar was basically a distribution point, you might say, for everything coming in from all over Asia, whether they're leaving China or coming into China. So, and it's always been my one of my favorite places to visit in China, along the Silk Road. But there are lots of other places. Turfan, which is, if you see sort of middle upper right, Turfan, the Turfan Basin. This basin is the second lowest depression on Earth. It has a number of these abandoned ancient cities. That last slide that I had shown was one of the abandoned cities along the Silk Road. So those are so Turfan and Kashgar are really, I highly recommend more than any other city. And I always look forward to going back.
That's great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bob. Final question here from our friend David Freeman. Bob, this is terrific. Two unrelated questions. One, to what extent has the current Hanification policies in Xinjiang province limited our ability to learn history of the Silk Roads through those regions? And two, what is your sense of the relative importance of commerce versus religion, Buddhism West and Christianity, Zoroastrianism East, in the history of the Silk Roads?
Yeah. Um, well, let's see. One of the reasons, other than Buddhism, and Buddhism was basically a missionary religion. It was a religion that was meant to be spread. So Buddhism was brought into China, and it went elsewhere into Central Asia as just for the purpose of spreading Buddhism. But all of the other religions that I mentioned, whether there's Zoroastrianism, which was early Sogdian traders were Zoroastrian, or even Nestorian Christians and Muslims, they were all basically traders, merchants who brought their religion with them. For example, the Zoroastrians, the Sogdians, established a very large Zoroastrian community in the capital of Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty. So you could say that religion being coming along the Silk Road was an after effect of, you might say, is because that the merchants that travel along the Silk Road belong to those religions, and they established their own communities along the route in various places. So that's you might say in terms of the spread of religions. Islam came in I think the first mosque in China was in the 8th century. So, okay, the first question. Well, the situation in Western China is is, how shall I say, is concerning. I have read as much as I can on the situation that's going on, but I'm not able to assess the ability of, say, tourists to go into that, or Western tourists or non-Chinese tourists to go into Western China and to interact with the people and learn. I know that if that happens, that the guides that will be assigned would have to toe the line politically. I do remember when I brought, it was either IUS or it was City College of San Francisco. We had a group and we went all the way to Kashgar, and and Turfan and Kashgar, and I gave I was giving lectures about the Silk Road in each area that we went. So when I got to Kashgar, I gave a talk on the Uyghurs, and our guide was Uyghur, and he had no idea. He was never taught the history of his own people. Now, the Uyghurs originally from Mongolia, as where the Turks are originally from Mongolia. So Turkish is basically originated in Mongolia and spread all the way to Turkey. So whether it's the Uyghurs or the Kyrgyz or the Kazakhs or the other peoples farther to the west, they all originated in Turkey originally. During the Tang Dynasty, the Uyghur as a military power was extremely strong, was very, very strong. But they associated themselves, they allied themselves basically with the Chinese. it wasn't until the Kyrgyz in the 9th century it came out of Mongolia and pushed the Uyghurs all the way into Xinjiang. So it was the 9th century that the Uyghurs entered the Tarim Basin, established their culture, their cities, that it became basically Uyghur. And all of the Tocharian speaking peoples, basically they either disappeared or the language disappeared, the writing disappeared, and was replaced by Uyghur writing and the language. So you only find Tocharian in ancient sites in museums. You don't find it anywhere else in the Tarim Basin or in Xinjiang. So I am concerned about what's happening there. I have been associated with the Uyghurs and like them very, very much since the mid 80s. And it is one of my favorite places in the whole world to visit. And I just hope that that they will survive what's happening to them today.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, my heart goes out to the Uyghur people and what's happening, that unrest that's happening in Western China. Now, with that being said, Bob, thank you so much.
I just wanted to say that I'm hoping that in the future for Crane House that I would, and I'm thinking about it right now, I would love to do a program on different ethnic communities in China. So 3 or 4 different ethnic communities, cultures, minorities, you might say, that I would like to talk about, including the Uyghurs and the Miao or the Hmong and the Kazakhs. So that's possible. That's a possibility for the future later this year.
And I would be the first one to register and buy a ticket for that, Bob, because actually being in China and the regions that I've been in, it's everything is Han. I mean, that's what we hear. When I speak to other people who are not familiar with China, just in the community here in Louisville, they don't even know that there are any other different ethnic classes within China. I was very fortunate to visit Kunming and see the variety of different Chinese. But if you host that class, I'll be the first one to register for that. That would be a great class.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that being said, thank you so much, sir, Sir Bob Jones, for your presentation. Do want to remind everyone that if we have your registration information, thank you for drinking out of your Asia Institute Crane House mug as well. If we have your registration information, you will get a copy of this recording. Or if you can't wait that long, it takes a while for us to download this video. Feel free to visit our website at Crane House. I mean, our website, our Facebook Live on Facebook, and you will see the video instantly. So yes, the video is recorded. It will be shared. And do want to remind everyone that May is AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander Appreciation Month. And for that, on May 13th, Asia Institute Crane House will be hosting a great cooking class hosted by our friends in Louisville Native Pantry, who will be preparing some of my favorite dishes, Filipino lumpia and Filipino adobo, or home national dish. So with that being said, thank you again, Bob, for the presentation. We got a great group of people. I'm excited to share with you who participated in this. It was a great group. It was a great group, actually. And thank you all so much for spending your Thursday evening with us. And we look forward to, thank you, Hayden, for that as well. Hayden Jones is saying, thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hosting you for our future talk. Now, with that being said, enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening and have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you all for participating. Thank you. All right. Good night.
Good night.